What is up, everybody? Welcome to The Stack. I'm Alex, and it is just me today. Justin and Pete are off for a variety of reasons, so thank you in advance for bearing with me as I rattle on for however long this takes, talking about comic books, probably repeating myself a lot, coming up with a lot of alright commentary on things. But we're going to get into this. We're going to do this. We got a big stack today, and we're going to kick it off with Batman Gotham by Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age, #1 from DC Comics, written by Andy Diggle, art by Leandro Fernandez. Now, this is a pretty interesting project, and I'm probably actually going to be saying that a lot because I think there are a lot of things in the stack that fall under the category of interesting project. But this one is the reboot of Elseworlds, an old imprint from DC Comics that was kind of their version of What If, but a little more extensive, a little more multiversal. This is bringing it back, and the reason I think it's weird and interesting is they've already got Black Label at DC Comics. That is their technically out-of-continuity label where people could do adult stuff. They could do slightly younger skewing stuff, like they're currently running The Boy Wonder. So I don't know how necessary Elseworlds is. Not only that, this team, it's a good team, mind you, is not the original team from Batman Gotham by Gaslight, which was a story which took Batman and sent him back to the Victorian era. There's one last little bit here that was really holding me up from getting into this. It's the Kryptonian Age. You can tell from the title. The idea here is that Superman shows up in some fashion. Spoiler, he doesn't show up in the first issue, but there's definitely hints that there is some of that stuff going on here. We get a little bit of a riff on Superman's origin story, and then it cuts to 33 years later. And then we get some hints of Kryptonian stuff as well throughout. But mostly it's a Catwoman story, and to that, I ended up liking this quite a bit. I thought this was a good Catwoman story. It definitely slow-paced things. But the real standout to me was Leandro Fernandez's art, which I think is very reminiscent, pleasantly so, of Eduardo Risso. Also has a little bit of hints of Maria Lovett, but not necessarily as exaggerated. I'm still not sold on this. I don't know why we are doing this, why we are bringing Elseworlds back now, why it needs to be a different label than Black Label. But this is a high-quality book. If you want to read a Victorian-era Batman book, look no further. There you go. Next up, hey, guess what? It's another interesting project. X-Men Heir of Apocalypse, #1 from Marvel, written by Steve Foxe, art by Netho Diaz. Here, the interesting part comes from the fact that last week, we got X-Men #35, aka Uncanny X-Men #700, which was the end of the Krakoan era at Marvel. Only here we've got a little bit of a vestigial limb of the Krakoan era as Apocalypse, who's the big villain of the last issue, talks to 12 of the X-Men characters and says, hey, you know what? I'm going to peace out to Mars. I'm going to go there and I'm going to rule Mars. So I need somebody to be Apocalypse down on Earth in the meantime and take care of the mutant race. It's weird that many mutants agree, and they're like, you know what, good idea. We spent a lot of time fighting you as a capper to this era. Let's just kind of get back into it before we get to the next thing. So continuity there, particularly given that we're kicking off the new era of X-Men the next month, a little strange to me. I wish we just had a clean break. But this is a very old school comic, particularly because of Netho Diaz's art. This feels like something we might have gotten back, maybe not as exaggerated art style, but back in the 90s. Tom Riley, I think, is the name of the artist I'm thinking of, who has a little bit more of a classic style. That's sort of what I'm getting here. And Steve Foxe does a good job of laying out who these characters are. They're insanely complicated continuity, like ludicrously complicated, and distilling them down pretty simply. So if you haven't been reading the X-Men books, you can jump right into this. It also has some twists and turns on what one would have thought was a Hunger Games, except with the X-Men concept. But given that mutant resurrection is now off the table, mild spoilers here, but I don't think they really want to kill anybody. Maybe everybody's not going to make this out of it alive, but there's not really the save points that they had in the previous era. So we'll have to see how this nets out. I don't know what we get out of there being an apocalypse on Earth, as well as an apocalypse on Mars. But again, a solid first issue. I'm curious to check out more. Moving on to a big one, Transformers #9, Image Comics and Skybound, written by Daniel Warren Johnson, art by Jorge Corona. I say a big one because if you've been listening to the Comic Book Club News podcast, we've been talking about sales there a lot. When I say we, I mean me, but I'm pretending it's a different person for no particular reason. In Energon Universe is kind of like the third of the big three at this point. The Transformers books, Void Rivals, the G.I. Joe books, and Cobra books that are slowly spinning up. They are selling huge numbers for modern comics. So it's definitely a big comic. I'm going to give it a minority opinion, and I'm sure people are going to tune out here. And if Pete and Justin ever listen to this, I'm sure they'll yell at me. This is very rapidly turning into not my thing, and I don't say that from the writing perspective or the art perspective. Love Daniel Warren Johnson, love Jorge Corona, both great, but this is robots mashing up against each other and bang, bang, bang and exploding, and frankly, to be a robot racist, it is hard for me to tell them apart when they're fighting like this, so I'm losing a little bit of that human element. It still comes in here, and there are some good moments. I'm not even talking about, by the way, like focusing on Spike or the girl or any of the other humans, though certainly that is good and that does create an entry point here. I'm just talking about the emotional resonance of why does this matter to Optimus Prime? Why does this matter to the bad guys? What do they want beyond, ha ha ha, we need Energon and we're fighting each other, we're both robots, bang, bang, bang. I don't need that. I need to care about these characters. And I definitely had that at the beginning and have lost that over the past couple of issues. But we're heading towards number 12, which may or may not be Daniel Warren Johnson's last issue. That hasn't been officially announced yet. But if it is, I expect he will leave it all on the table. There will be a big gut punch by the end, because there always is. Moving on to one that I was very excited about this week, particularly because we talked to the writer on the live Comic Book Club show, or at least I talked to him. Those other guys just not even showing up. You know what I'm talking about? No, it's fine. They're fine. Lawful #1 from Boom Studios, written by Greg Pak, art by Diego Galindo. This is a great new fantasy series that takes place in a town where if you do anything wrong, it starts to show on you physically. So you grow horns, you get welts, you get scales or lion's paws or anything like that. So it's very much this checks and balances thing about not even, I think some people could see it as like a cancel culture thing or something having to do with society and the way that you have to walk on eggshells today. But I think it's a lot more, given the main character is somebody who, when he's very young, does something wrong, gets these whelps sort of in the shape of a heart, where his heart is. It's very representative there. And then spends the rest of his life scared of doing anything wrong. I don't know about you, but full honesty time, that's how I feel a lot of the time. So I felt a lot relatable in here of, oh God, if I do the wrong thing at any moment, people are going to see it on my face. And this literally makes that happen. It also, of course, puts him through the tests, puts him through the ringers in terms of a friend of his who very much is showing bad stuff throughout this. So I thought this was great. If you're looking for a new fantasy series to follow, this is definitely one to check out. And in Diego Galindo's art, which just has great creature people throughout, living in a otherwise very normal city world. So this is really cool. Next up, Green Lantern #12 from DC Comics, written by Jeremy Adams, art by Xermánico and Kevin Maguire. I'm going to contrast this directly with what I was saying about Transformers, because we do have these huge battle scenes. The United Planets, I think that's what it is, I always get it wrong, has risen against the Green Lanterns and the other corps. Specifically, there's one guy in the middle, the bad guy here, who has blown up all the lanterns, wants to consolidate all the control under him. Of course, the Lanterns are fighting back against that, including Hal Jordan, but what Jeremy Adams has been doing so well in the series is really getting into the brashness of Hal Jordan, that, yeah, he's great. He has a lot of willpower, but he also just barrels into situations without thinking. In the meantime, there's been this fantastic romantic subplot in the background where Carol Ferris has been struggling with the fact that she's seeing somebody else. Hal really wants to be with her, but she is in a steady relationship for the first time in her life. It all comes down, or mostly comes down in this issue, before the absolute power event that's coming runs smack dab into the middle of it. But such great emotional moments. And in between all these big battle sequences, versus what I was talking about with Transformers, there's this excellent emotional hook of these two characters in the middle there that really, really works. Plus, you have a fun backup story by Adams with art by the always reliable Kevin Maguire about Guy Gardner hanging out with not Lobo, but a Lobo in the middle of the House of Brainiac storyline. Very, very fun stuff. Overall, just a great package. Definitely worth checking out. G.O.D.S. number 8 from Marvel, written by Jonathan Hickman, art by Valerio Schiti. This is the last issue of this title for now, and I feel conflicted about it. Valerio Schiti's designs, are gorgeous. These characters are instantly iconic. There's some really interesting redesigns for the cosmic characters, particularly the in-betweener, but it's been very hard to focus in on the main characters. And granted, Jonathan Hickman is doing a good job of making it all about, I believe it's Win, Aiko, and a third person, but Win and Aiko, I may have this wrong, are the main characters who, when we started off, War and Love had to break up because one of them works for science and one of them works for magic. Ultimately, this whole title so far is a love story between the two of them, so it does make it more intimate, it does make it more focused, but my concern here, just to sound contradictory with what I've said before, is there's so many big Hickman ideas going on at the same time and so much big mythology. That's kind of where my mind goes with this one when I'm reading it, is I want to understand what the stakes are, what's going on in the middle. I care about this emotional relationship and these very involving characters, but everybody seems so removed from each other. They seem so wry and cool about it. Again, a pattern emerging here, but I think the emotional stakes are what I really want to know. And they're almost right there, but not quite. And we're 8 issues in, and I don't know if we're ever going to see this title again. So it definitely does not feel resolved at all. There's more to say. I think Jonathan Hickman is enough of a big name creator that if he wants to do it again, they'll do it again, but we'll see what happens. Moving to a new one that's just kicking off, Remote Space number 1 from Image Comics. This is by Cliff Rathburn, who handles both art and writing. And this takes place in a future world where climate change got so bad that humans protected themselves in 2 ways. One, they went into space and delved into cybernetics. The ones who stayed on Earth dabbled with genetic manipulation and became horrific monsters at the same time. The story here is okay. We're following those two paths that haven't quite collided together again at the end. This feels very much, I know it's a bad comparison, but this feels very much like first of a 8-part movie type television TV show versus being its own unique thing. But the character designs by Cliff Rathburn are so good, particularly the genetically modified people who live on Earth. They're these horrific, demonic monsters. It feels like something out of Doom almost, but they're really, really well done. Cliff Rathburn has worked on Invincible and I think a couple of other Robert Kirkman titles to give you an idea of the style that's present there. Really good-looking book. Intriguing setup, but it's not quite there yet in terms of the story. We'll see if that changes with the second issue. Here's another kickoff into the Unbeing number 1 from Dark Horse Comics, written by Zac Thompson, art by Hayden Sherman. I don't have too much to say about this other than this is basically Annihilation, and I say that complimentarily, where there are a bunch of scientists who are in a remote area. Suddenly a mountain shows up, and they decide to explore the mountain, and as they go, things get weirder, the creatures get weirder. Hayden Sherman's art is phenomenal in this book. Again, the creature designs are great. Zac Thompson has been writing a bunch of purposefully weird and eerie books recently that are working really nicely. This one creeped me out in exactly the way that something like this should creep you out. Even with the Annihilation comparisons, this is definitely heading towards its own mythology. I don't know, this feels like the sort of thing that we'll never get any answers about, but if you're into that mystery box type storytelling, per the box of Lost that viewers of the show can tell that is right behind me. I'm certainly into that. But if you're into that kind of storytelling, I think you'll like this quite a bit. Here's another mystery box. Look, I arranged the stack so well. Outsiders #8 from DC Comics, written by Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, art by Robert Carey. We've been following Batwoman, Batwing, and who we thought was the drummer, but is not actually the drummer, as they're investigating weird mysteries in the DC universe. Batwoman quit in a previous issue after revelations came up about the drummer and the actual mission of the Outsiders. So she is on her own this issue and tasked with tracking down Ginny Hex, the non-scarred, distant descendant of Jonah Hex. This issue involves some ghosts. It's kind of upsetting in terms of what happens with Batwoman. There's a lot more to come, but I think what we're getting here is most likely a couple of solo issues where we follow Batwoman. We maybe, I think, see what is going on with Batwing, or maybe the drummer in the next issue, and it'll kind of go from there before they ultimately come back together. But if you're a fan of Jonah Hex, if you're a fan of Ginny Hex, who was appearing for a while, this is a neat dark ghost story that feels a little Tales from the Crypty. Again, if that gives you any sort of idea, I'm really, really enjoying this series. Now, I didn't want to skip this, even though this is a lot for me to do on my own, but it is time for the Blood Block. Blah, 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 blah. Justin does that better than I do. But we got a bunch of Blood Hunt titles, and I will note that if you're following along with the checklist at the back of issues, not all of them in the order that they printed there came out this week, but there are still a lot. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Blood Hunt issues that came out this week, so that's a fair amount of comics all about vampires and the Marvel Universe. We'll take them one at a time, kicking it off with Blood Hunt #3 from Marvel, written by Jed MacKay, art by Pepe Larraz. I generally like this event, and I like the mystery of why Blade is leading a vampire army against the Earth, but this event is starting to feel very much like one of those highlights events where people show up, they pop up, they do one thing for 1 or 2 pages, and they're like, I got to go to my mini-series, I'll check you later. And then they do. They run off into their own series or their mini-series, and that's where you follow them. Or, hey, you have a mission to go on, you got to do this thing. And again, that's followed in a mini-series or another series. So we're not really getting much of a story so much as a backbone here, which is always a bummer for me. I want to see something that tells a story in its own right and then spins out into all of these other titles. And I realize that is very hard. I have never written an event comic that spun out through multiple titles and one-shots and miniseries and all that. That is very difficult. But I wish these things would start with, okay, we have a series called Blood Hunt. What is the story we're telling? Done. And then people look at it and say, okay, what can we pick out? What can we do there? What can we tell around the world that ties in? And maybe you have to tweak and change some things there. Not to talk about the distinguished competition, but there was an interview recently with Mark Waid where he was talking about exactly that with Absolute Power, that he wants all these miniseries to feel important. He wants people to read Absolute Power, but Absolute Power Text Force 7. He also wants them to read and make it feel like it's crucial. So we'll see how that pans out here. Right now, I think I'm almost enjoying the spin-offs, or some of the spin-offs at least, more than the main title, just because I'm not quite getting enough there. But again, it's a spine, and I'm enjoying the spine because I am invested in finding out why Blade is doing what he's doing, and Pepe Larraz's art is just killer. There's a page towards the end when something is revealed that I won't spoil here that is just big action stuff, and ultimately I guess that's what you want out of these events, but as I'm saying, I want a little more. X-Men Blood Hunt Jubilee #1 from Marvel, written by Preeti Cheeber, art by Enid Balam. This is a one-shot showing what is going on with Jubilee, who was once a vampire and now no longer a vampire, in the middle of Blood Hunt. This is actually the opposite of what I was saying. This doesn't feel entirely necessary at all to the ongoing story of Blood Hunt, but answer the question, hey, Jubilee was a vampire, what's she up to? This is a pretty good Jubilee story. Enid Balam's art is very good, particularly her designs for Jubilee. She's got the right amount of attitude through here. And Preeti Cheeber brings a ton of continuity with Vampire Jubilee to bear in this comic and makes it all work and simplifies it and just focuses it on Jubilee and how she's feeling. It's quippy, it's funny. Per Happy Pride, there's a little bit of a queer thing going on in the middle here if you're into that. So fun stuff, fun one-shot, particularly if you're a fan of the character. Here's one I didn't know how it was going to work at all. Fantastic Four number 21 from Marvel, written by Ryan North, art by Ivan Fiorello. And Fantastic Four has been one of my favorite titles from Marvel, month in and month out. For the most part, Ryan North has been telling these done-in-one stories that really just connect to the Fantastic Four. That's it. It's like Fantastic Four, but dinosaurs, or Fantastic Four, and they're in another dimension, or they're encountering aliens, or whatever. They're off on their own track and not in the main thing. So it always worries me when you bring them into the main thing. How is that going to affect the tone of the title? The answer is not at all. This is still very much on pace with Fantastic Four. And in fact, this is one of my favorite issues of the week. It takes Reed Richards and Alicia Masters, brings them to New York to go to an art museum to see an art exhibit for the blind where you can touch famous pieces of art and really get a sense of them. And you have this very heady, intelligent guy who doesn't understand art, Reed Richards, and Alicia, who obviously is all emotion, teamed together. Phenomenal pairing. I don't know that I've ever seen that before, and I just love seeing these mixed points of views together. Ryan North definitely pushes them to extreme, and even though they are in the middle of New York when vampires attack, it's still a fantastic, not done in one story because it's continuing the next issue, but great emotional grounding here as they worry about the rest of their family back home and whether they're also being attacked by vampires. It shows Reed Richards' powers in a way that I've never seen before. This is phenomenal. Even if you haven't been reading the ongoing series, if you're into Blood Hunt or you're curious to read a story of Reed Richards and Alicia palling around during a vampire attack in New York, that's a very specific want that you're asking for, but guess what? This comic will fulfill that need, so there you go. Strange Academy Blood Hunt number 2 from Marvel, written by Daniel Jose Older, art by Luigi Zagaria and Eric Gapster. This is focusing on the young kids who go to school run by not Doctor Strange, but Brother Blood? I don't know. Somebody, bunch of magic people are up there. I've clearly hit a wall with my remembering things and only being one person. This is why you need co-hosts, folks. Anyway, they're tracking down the Darkhold, who is a little boy, and trying to take him back to cast a spell that's going to destroy all the vampires on Earth. Again, some twists and turns. I think when they really focus in on the characters here, it really works. The Darkhold kid is very interesting and ties very directly to everything that they're doing with Strange Academy, which is take kids that could be good, could be bad, they're magic tied, what could happen to them. So that was nicely done. This is not my overall favorite title, but I like what they did in this issue. Here's something that I'm very iffy about it. This has nothing to do with the issue. Miles Morales, Spider-Man number 21 from Marvel, written by Cody Ziegler, art by Brent Peoples and Daniel Picciotto. As revealed in the previous issue of Blood Hunt, Miles Morales is a vampire now. We find out how he became a vampire in this issue and find out what it means for him. I don't love Miles being a vampire, particularly because, and I guess spoilers here, but this has come out with the solicits, that he will continue to be a vampire past Blood Hunt. I just don't know why they can't settle on some sort of status quo for Miles Morales. The contradictory thing I'll say that immediately I thought of while I was thinking about my commentary for this book, for the show, is I really love things like the era where Spider-Man became Captain Universe, and of course that is way outside of his wheelhouse. Same thing here with Miles Morales becoming a vampire. Ultimately, it's about what it does to him, how it changes him, how it affects him. The answer in this issue is a little bit, but not too much, but it definitely ties into some continuity that Cody Ziegler has already laid down. This is just me looking ahead at the tea leaves and wondering how they're going to handle this long term, because I cannot imagine we're 5 years from now, or even 2 years from now, or even 1 year from now, and Miles Morales is still a vampire. And if so, I feel like we've gone somewhere wrong along the way. Amazing Spider-Man Blood Hunt number 2 from Marvel, written by Justina Ireland, art by Marcelo Ferreira and Chris Campana. This is mostly focusing on Morbius, who has been recruited by a guy who eerily looks like Matt Smith's character from Morbius, the hit movie that is now streaming on Netflix. Or not. I'm honestly not sure where it's streaming, and don't watch it. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But Spoiler here, they do say it's morbid time in this issue, so at least we got something good out of that movie. Again, not my absolute favorite here. This feels like a lot of stuff happening as Spider-Man swings around. We get Morbius, we get Lizard, we get Misty Knight, there's some Colleen Wing. A lot of characters going on here, and I'm just not quite sure what we're saying about them or how this ties into the whole event, other than keeping a bunch of people, particularly Morbius, busy while this vampire thing is going on. And another surprise fave as we wrap up the Blood Block, The Avengers, number 15 from Marvel, written by Jed MacKay, art by C.F. Villa. I mentioned this with the last issue, but this is taking a team of thrown-together Avengers by Captain America. You got Hercules, you got Hazmat, Quicksilver, Kate Bishop, Hawkeye, and I feel like there's one more person that I'm forgetting, but it is this I'm losing words here, makeshift team of Avengers while the regular Avengers are being attacked by vampires in the mainstream continuity. It's great. This is everything that I want out of Avengers title. It is fun. It's fast. You got the Avengers fighting Baron Blood in a stolen vampire-filled helicarrier. This is a good time at the old comic book shop. Highly recommend picking this up. If you felt like the Avengers under Jed MacKay was a little too complicated, this is what you've been looking for, and this is certainly what I've been looking for. Blood Block over. We did it, everybody. We made it through together. Congratulations to all of us. Rifters, number 1 from Image Comics, written by Brian Prozane and Joe Trobin, art by Chris Johnson. This is basically Time Cop meets Law and Order is how I think they pitched it. So eventually, very far into the book, we get to 2 jaded cops who investigate time mysteries now that everybody pretty much has access to time travel and has repeatedly screwed up the time stream. It takes a long time to get there. Like, half the issue is explaining how the world got time travel, why there are a bunch of weird time anomaly things wandering everywhere, what people do with it now. And it's all interesting and fun, but it feels like the story Bible that they should have left on the side and just started with the cops, because once you get to the cops of this world where dinosaurs are wandering around and taking pictures and there's strange buildings and spaceships flying and everything that you can imagine with time anomalies and weirdness, that's when it gets good and fun. That's when we are following these specific characters on this specific mission. It really focuses up there, and I liked it quite a bit, which means I'm definitely picking up the second issue of this, but stick with it. It's fun details, but it really just shows you don't need all the information up top. You don't need that info dump. Just get to the good stuff. Cut out the beginning part and get to where it's fun. Speaking of which, The Wicked Trinity, number 1 from Archie Comics, written by Sam Maggs, who we also had on the live show this week, written by Lisa Sturl. This is taking a couple of Sabrina-associated characters, specifically a witch or witch in training-ish, who has fire powers, one who has water powers, and one who is connected to plants. They are the Wicked Trinity of the title, and they just want to be cool and popular, just like Sabrina. This is fun. This is loose. This is funny. This is one of the more focused titles that I think I've seen from Archie in a while, mostly because they've been doing these anthologies and one-shots, and this is something that presumably is going to spin out a little bit longer than that. But really like the art from Lisa Storl. These are very unique, specific characters. I like the tease of where we're going next by the end of the issue. If you're into witches, if you're into 3 things... Who isn't? Check out The Wicked Trinity on stands now. Suicide Squad Dream Team, number 4 from DC Comics, written by Nicole Maines, art by Eddie Barrows and Eber Ferreira. This is leading us directly into Absolute Power, so if you have interest in the event, definitely pick this up. But Dreamer is fighting back against the entire Suicide Squad. She maybe wants to kill Amanda Waller for taking over the island nation of Gamora and planning on turning it into a prison for superpowered people. We know from knowing what's going to happen in Absolute Power that she's going to steal all the powers from everybody, so we probably are going to get a Superman, Wonder Woman, etc. in prison type thing. The twists towards the end of this issue is great. We've said it pretty consistently here on the podcast, but Nicole Maines has really elevated Dreamer into an A-list player, and I think this comic in particular digs down on that. She's in a very bad way by the end of this issue, but her powers are cool, the character is clear. This is great. When they eventually reform the Justice League, I hope and expect that she will probably be on the team. That is how good it is. And interesting stuff for the rest of the Suicide Squad as well. You might be feeling Amanda Waller fatigue, but again, if you have any interest in the event, or not, if you just want to read a good story, pick this one up. Giant Size Daredevil #1 from Marvel, written by Saladin Ahmed, art by Paul Davidson. This is set in the current continuity of Daredevil, and we've been a little back and forth with these Giant Size books. I mean, they're all current continuity, but some of them feel like they're very side to what's going on. This definitely is not. This is focusing on Kingpin. He has been taken over by one of the 7 deadly sins who are haunting and attacking Daredevil throughout the main series. We don't, spoiler, get closure here. This is not a done-in-one title, but if you've been hankering for a good Kingpin is bad tale, that's definitely what this is. Also, a word of warning here. This might be the most violent book that I read all week, which I was absolutely not expecting. There's horrific things that the Kingpin does throughout here that are gross and bloody. This feels almost aligned with like a Garth Ennis, Jose Van Rip book. Maybe not quite as extreme, but it's pretty close. We're only talking like 15-20% down, something like that. So be warned before you hand this to kids in particular. Speaking of one that kids shouldn't read, The Deviant #6 from Image Comics, written by James Tynion IV, art by Joshua Hickson. We have been following a comic book writer who has been interviewing a serial killer, or supposed serial killer, that he was obsessed with back in the day. In recent issues, we found out that maybe the comic book writer has brought these killings back. We're not 100% sure necessarily. There's a lot of questions there. But in this issue, we're following his boyfriend, who is starting to investigate on his own because he doesn't believe his boyfriend, the comic book writer, could do this. So one of the things that they're doing really, really well in a very upsetting way in this book is making you not know who to believe on an issue-by-issue basis. It's all depending on who's telling the story. It's all whose perspective it is, all who we're hearing from. Everybody is untrustworthy in their own way, in a very upsetting way. And it feels unsettling when you're reading this book, but that's the point. It's a creepy, dark Christmas fable about a serial killer who murders young boys wearing a creepy Santa Claus outfit. Of course it's going to be terrifying, and that's what we get here. But where I was almost sure that, okay, yes, I guess the comic book writer did it when I was reading the last issue, this issue, I'm not so sure. And I think we'll keep going back and forth until this series ends. So great mystery writing here. Another, not mystery because it's out of the open, even though some cops trying to solve it. Crocodile Black #2, which is different from Crocodile Rock by the immortal Elton John. From Boom Studios, written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, art by Sam. We are following a guy who found some crocodile boots and clearly has some severe mental problems, but basically has become a ghost who kills people for relatively unknown reasons. Not a literal ghost, since we've talked about those earlier in the podcast, but a figurative ghost, that there may be some mystical stuff going on. Possibly he is getting in a worse way in this issue as things get darker and more upsetting. There's, similar to what we were just talking about with the Deviant, there's a lot you don't know because you're in this character's head most of the time. What is his perspective? What does he want? Where is he going? Why is he doing what he's doing? We don't know, but in a very different unsettling feeling because it's a different setting, and Sam's art style is much more dreamlike. It does feel like you're floating through a nightmare a little bit when you read this, so interesting block we've got here, I guess, of serial killers and murderers, but two very different stories, both well worth checking out. Scarlet Witch #1 from Marvel, written by Steve Orlando, art by Jacopo Camagni. This is, I believe, the 50,000th Scarlet Witch #1 that Steve Orlando has written, but it's back. The series is back. Scarlet Witch is back in a new setting, but she's still got her magic shop and a red door that helps out people in need. But We get thrust right into it here, even though this is picking up on Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. It is a number one. There's a new challenge facing Scarlet Witch, but there is no time for her to breathe as she is just thrown into the middle of an absolute magical nightmare. There's some big answers here about what's been going on with the Red Door. Maybe it was an early issue and I missed it, but I don't think so. If it is a reveal here, it's pretty cool. I thought it was cool, so I'll mention it. The art from Jacopo Camagni is great. I love the supporting cast here. We've got Quicksilver is still present. Darcy of the movies and TV, star of stage and screen, is present as well. And we've got some new folks here that are also very intriguing as they live in this small elite town and deal with a pretty horrifying problem. So good stuff, great start. If you haven't been reading the previous series, you can jump right in here. Akagun, Brutalizer of Gods, number 2 from Oni Press, written by Murawe Ayodele, art by Dotun Akande. We are following the Brutalizer of the title, kind of. This takes place in a mythological world where gods are constantly fighting. They're constantly destroying each other, cutting each other to ribbons, and in the process, they end up really hurting the world below and don't really care about the people. Hence, Akagun, who wants revenge on the gods. He wants to brutalize them. So we're following these 2 trains running in multiple different time periods. As with the first issue, this is a stunning, stunning book just to look at, just from the art perspective. The art feels like Assad Ribish a little bit, but again, not quite as exaggerated. The lines are cleaner, a little smoother here, but really gorgeous god stuff. This is very much for adults. There is a adult sex scene in this book, as well as the brutalizing of the title. So kids turn away here. But for anybody who's interested in delving into a fresh new mythology with some shocking action sequences and really deep character storytelling, this is definitely one not to miss. Geiger, number 3 from Image Comics and Ghost Machine, written by Jeff Johns, art by Gary Frank. In this issue, Geiger and his squire, who should really be called Squiger, I think we can all agree on, head to a western town. This is already kind of a western, but it gets even more specifically being a western in this issue. There's a little bit of a train robbery vibe kind of thing going on. I really like this new run of Geiger, like we talked about with the previous run. Gary Frank's art, always good. Jeff Johns knows his way around the story, but it was really spinning its wheels. And here we have an antagonist for Geiger, the radioactive man, bubbling in the background. We have a clear mission for them to be on, where Geiger is looking for somebody else like him who seems to have cured the condition. Whether that's true or not, I guess we'll see. But much clearer direction going on in this book. And of course, you got the always reliable Gary Frank art. Ultimate X-Men number 4 from Marvel by Peach Momoko. This continues to be complimentarily, did I say that right this time? I think so. One of the best books on the stands and one of the wildest books on the stands. This is unlike any X-Men book you ever read. It is filtered through Peach Momoko, so it's got a bit of that manga vibe. Not even a bit, a lot of that manga vibe. As our main characters are all in school, discovering their mutant powers. Our main window character is Armor, who is slowly realizing there are a lot more mutant girls in her school. Maybe some guys as well, but the guys seem to be bad or have a little bit of the J horror around them as they become these spooky ghosts. I like how this is coming out, and I avidly read every issue, but this very much has, and I think I said this with the last issue, but this very much has that manga pace where it's published in short little chapters. So it almost harkens back more than the rest of the Ultimate books to the old Ultimate books, which gave rise to the written for the trade moniker. This is not exactly like that because things do happen in every specific issue and they do have an arc to them, but there's not a lot that happens here. It's very sparse in terms of the storytelling. So while I recommend picking up every issue just because Peach Momoko's art is stunning and the designs are gorgeous and fluid, this might be a good one to get in the trade as well, just to get more of a complete experience of reading. Heartpiercer, number 2 from Dark Horse Comics, written by Rich Dueck, art by Gavin Smith. This is another fantasy book taking place in a world where the Heartpiercer of the title helped her boss kill off all of these magical creatures only to be betrayed by him, stabbed right through the gut and left for dead. Years later, she's shown back up and is ready for revenge. She has some new powers at her side. This is some killer action throughout this book. We get a bunch of mythology going on here as we explore a little bit of what the world has become since she left. But again, a really great fantasy book, really well worth picking up. I love the start here. Rich Douek's writing is very arch, but takes time for a joke here and there at the same time. And Gavin Smith's art is really killer. I don't have a good comparison point, but it's just some really good, solid fantasy art. There's some good creature design throughout here as well. I know you've used that phrase several times, but it's good stuff. Pick it up, and it looks like it's only going to get darker and nastier as it goes. Ain't No Grave, #2 from Image Comics, written by Scotty Young, art by Jorge Corona. There he is again. This is about a woman who is dying of cancer, and so she travels to the underworld to kill death so that she can have more time with her little girl. Really like Jorge Corona's art in here, and I'm always a fan of Scotty Young, but I'm not quite sure there's enough story here yet to sustain this premise for multiple issues. Probably should have looked up how long it's going to go on for, but versus the first issue that gave us the emotional stakes, set our character on a journey, this one, she's going on a bunch of adventures through the underworld, and we're not necessarily getting a lot of movement. It feels like just throwing roadblocks in her way, which, mind you, I understand is the basis of fiction, but it's throwing roadblocks in her way without too much progression going on here. So while I'll still read this because I like the team, I'm a little iffy how far they can take this. I want to see, you got this ticking time clock in terms of, is she going to kill death or is she not going to kill death? And there's only so far you can drag it on before you get there. We'll see what happens. Spider-Boy #8 from Marvel, written by Dan Slott, art by Jason Liu. The first half of this issue is taken up with wrapping up the Madam Monstrosity storyline that found Bailey Bass wrestling with his origins. There's some great fun stuff in the beginning here and some emotional stuff as he tries to bond with his mom, who just does not remember him. But the real draw here is the second half. That is classic Dan Slott, absolute ludicrousness, where Bailey fights a villain whose powers are based in puzzles. I'm forgetting his exact name. It's not the Puzzler, but he basically is straight out of a puzzle page in the newspaper. So he looks towards the reader and is like, can you solve this mystery? And then some of the pages are a word search or a maze or a word jumble, things like that. It's absolutely bananas. You wouldn't see this anywhere else. Like I've said with multiple issues here, this really harkens back in a great way to Dan Slott's history with kids comics. I love this. I am just eating this title up, and I love that there is a title that is in the Spider-Man line and is not involved in fighting vampires, and it's just perfect for kids, and it's a great mix of emotion and absolutely goofy jokes. So good stuff. Definitely check it out. Last but not least, Monsters Are My Business, #3 from Dark Horse Comics, written by Cullen Bunn, art by Patrick Piazzalunga. We're almost to the end here, following a bunch of monster hunters who are fighting eldritch terrors. They're trying to protect this horse creature from a bunch of them, so there's a little bit of a standoff thing going on, assault on Precinct 13 type thing, where all the monsters are attacking their stronghold, except in this case it's a bar. But again, great creatures in here. We get some big mythology going on, and a tease that things will change in next issue, which I believe is the last issue. If it is, I wanted to spend a little more time with this premise and this world, so we'll see if it continues, because it went very big very quickly. We didn't get the idea of just a dude and a koala traveling through a wasteland of monsters and solving mysteries and things like that. And I would love just a basic premise like that. I know, again, this has sounded contradictory with Ain't No Grave, where I was like, come on, you got to get to it. But this is a very basic, straightforward procedural premise of dude on a bike matched with a koala and a bunch of people who don't particularly like him solving supernatural mysteries. That's fun. I want more of that. So maybe a sequel. We'll see what happens. And that's it. We did it. We all did it together. We're all equal partners in this. If you'd like to support this podcast, patreon.com/comicbookclub. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Facebook and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about comic books. Apple, Spotify, Android, or the app of your choice to subscribe, listen, and follow the show. At Comic Book Live on Twitter/X, Comic Book Club Live on TikTok and Instagram, comicbookclublive.com for this podcast and many more. Until next time, we'll see you at the Comic Book Club. Justin, Pete, please come back.